Step out of your 6000 SUX, stop watching TJ Lazer reruns, put down that flyer from the art centre, box up your game in NUKEM, and try if you can to
stay out of trouble.
That's right folk, we're time travelling to the not too distant future of 2043 Detroit in this episode of Revisited, where Paul Verhoeven set his seminal all-time classic sci-fi action epic Robocop. The Dutch director showcases all of his trademark filmmaking skills and a penchant for graphic violence in the movie, and it remains an often copied but never bettered example of visceral sci-fi filmmaking. Just think of entertainment empires that are now synonymous with the era in which they first emerged and have gained longevity in various forms. For example, Star Wars, Marvel, The Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, and it's hard to imagine a mid-budget movie such as Robocop having the same cultural appeal or influence. However, just like its hero Alex Murphy, it's proved very hard to kill. The most obvious reason for this is that the movie is simply awesome. So stock up on baby food and get ready to dive headfirst into the most violently hardcore sci-fi movie to emerge from the 1980s, Robocop.
I'd buy that for $1.
So unnecessary.
The idea for the film first came from aspiring screenwriter Edward Nehemiah, who was working as a junior story executive for Universal Pictures in the early 1980s. Nehemiah was influenced by robot-centered movies such as Star Wars and loved action cinema as well as the mature comic books he would read for potential future acquisition deals. It was while working on the 1982 sci-fi classic Blade Runner that Nehemiah got the idea for Robocop. He's quoted as saying, "I had this vision of a far distant Blade Runner type world where there was an all-mechanical cop coming to a sense of real human intelligence." He then began collaborating with aspiring director Michael Miner, who had produced a robot-themed rock music video and who also had an idea for a film called Super Cop.
Why, you gotta be some kind of great cop. Come in here all by yourself.
The film focuses on Detroit police officer Alex Murphy, who was murdered by a gang of criminals and subsequently brought back to life by mega corporation Omni Consumer Products.
You're gonna be a bad mother.
As the cyborg Robocop. With his memory seemingly erased forever, the Super Cop executes a brutal campaign against crime in Detroit, while also coming to terms with the slowly returning fragments of his own humanity. The movie's plot was influenced by the 1960s psychological horror Psycho, in which the film's heroine is also killed off in the first act. The movie also has an unforgettable satirical edge that was influenced by writer Nehemiah's experience with corporate culture, and the infamous scene where Ed 209 lays waste to poor, unfortunate Mr. Kinney was inspired by Nehemiah's office daydreams about a robot bursting into a meeting and killing everyone. While in development, the first draft of the script was titled Robocop, The Future of Law Enforcement, which is admittedly a bit of a mouthful. It was passed around industry to friends and associates of writers Nehemiah and Miner, and before long the pair had offers from both Atlantic Releasing and director Jonathan Kaplan and producer John Davison from Orion Pictures. Davison was drawn to the satirical edge of the script and showed Nehemiah and Miner films such as Mad Max 2, Dirty Harry and Madigan to get across the tone that he envisioned for the movie. Once Orion greenlit the project, Nehemiah and Miner set about writing a second draft of the script, and the birth of one of the most iconic sci-fi characters was well underway.
Thank you for your cooperation. Good night.
When director Kaplan left to make 1987's Project X, the search began for his replacement, and it was a 6-month process that saw many names thrown around before they found their man. Most filmmakers were put off by the film's title, thinking it played too young, like the Transformers-like GoBots or another version of Forbidden Planet's Robbie the Robot, for example. If only they knew what they were about to miss out on.
You call this a glitch?
The project was offered to the likes of David Cronenberg, who, in hindsight, would have been a wild choice to direct the movie. Just imagine the awesome amount of body horror he would have developed from the premise. In fact, Amazon have recently announced that they are revisiting the Robocop franchise, so what about Cronenberg Jr. taking a shot at it? It won't happen, he's too edgy for the likes of Amazon to trust with their expensively acquired IPs, but just imagine the trip he'd take Alex Murphy on. Regardless of what they do with the franchise, it won't have the satirical bite or hardcore violence of the movie. Or will it? Again, let us know your thoughts in the comments. Ultimately, Orion executive Barbara Boyle suggested Paul Verhoeven should direct the movie, on the back of the acclaim he had achieved from both his 1977 romantic thriller Soldier of Orange and also 1985's Flesh and Blood, his only English language film at the time. However, Verhoeven took one look at the first page of the script and dismissed it out of hand as being awful, putting the brakes on the project for a while. It wasn't until his wife Martine encouraged him to give the second copy of the script he was sent another chance, and to consider the subtext and soul of the story, in which somebody loses their identity in such a visceral way. Verhoeven admitted that not being fluent in English meant that the satire in the script was lost on him, but that the scene in which Murphy visits his abandoned home and experiences lingering memories of his former life was intriguing. Verhoeven initially wanted to direct Robocop as a serious film. However, after Nehemiah and Miner explained to him that their vision of the movie was more like something akin to 2000 AD, featuring Judge Dredd, Verhoeven admitted that a more comic book tone would suit the project perfectly. And boy were they right.
Happy New Year.
The film stars Peter Weller as Alex Murphy / Robocop, most famous previously for TV roles and the 1985 film My Sister's Keeper, also known as A Killing Affair. Weller had the perfect physique for the role, in that he was tall and intimidating, but also slim enough so that he could peel himself into the suit relatively comfortably. Nancy Allen, best known for being a bitchy teen goddess in De Palma's horror masterpiece Carrie, as well as roles opposite the likes of Jack Nicholson and John Travolta, plays Murphy's partner Anne Lewis.
Lewis, come here when you finish around with your suspect.
The late Daniel O'Hurley plays OCP's top brass, the Old Man. Ronnie Cox is the corrupt scheming Dick Jones, and Miguel Ferrer, who sadly passed away in 2017, played the unfortunate Bob Morton. Kurtwood Smith, above all else, steals the show and is one of the most memorable villains from the 1980s, spitting out killer lines and blood, while dominating the criminal underworld with pure gravitas.
Just give me my phone call.
The most notable supporting cast members feature the likes of ER veteran Paul McCrane as Emil Antonowski, who also gets his fair share of brilliant lines.
I bet you think you're pretty smart, huh? Think you could outsmart a bullet?
And one of the most gruesome death scenes ever put to screen. The movie also features Ray Wise as Leon Nash, Jesse DeGoins as Joe Cox, Calvin Jeune as Steve Min, all of which helped make up Boddicker's gang. Also, we can't leave out the legendary Robert DeKay as Sergeant Warren Reed, Felton Perry as OCP employee Donald Johnson, Lee DeBrew as cocaine warehouse owner Sal,
Frankie, blow this cocksucker's head off.
Ooh, guns.
and the unforgettable poor schmuck Mr. Kinney, who finds himself on the end of a flurry of bullets from the malfunctioning Ed 209. The cast are all awesome, and every single one of the aforementioned characters has at least one memorable and endlessly quotable scene. And yes, that includes the airborne Bobby.
Can you fly, Bobby?
Clarence, no!
Generally speaking, the early movies from Dutch filmmaker Paul Verhoeven were initially dismissed as being low-rent genre flicks, only for them to gather cult status, grow in the public imagination, and ultimately remain firmly in the zeitgeist. Both 1990's Total Recall and 1997's Starship Troopers are classic examples, and to be fair, you could probably throw the incredibly badass Robocop into that mix.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Set in a dystopian crime-riddled Detroit, where a huge conglomerate owns the police force, the hero's journey isn't your typical Hollywood trope, where they must overcome insurmountable odds in order to do the right thing. Nah, this movie is way more cynical, and therefore satirically biting than that.
Why don't you drive?
With Alex Murphy's prime directive not only to serve the public trust, but to do so as effectively as possible to maximise the profits of aforementioned conglomerate OCP. Before I introduced to Robocop himself, via a Darth Vader-like genesis, OCP realised they need a new form of cop, after their self-promoted future of law enforcement goes haywire during a boardroom presentation and riddles a low-level executive, the aforementioned poor Mr. Kinney, with bullets. After Peter Weller's newly transferred cop, Alex Murphy, is tortured and seemingly fatally shot in the head by crime lord Clarence Boddicker, his body is transformed into OCP executive Bob Morton's new project, Robocop. A powerful and heavily armed cyborg with no memory of his former life, Robocop is programmed with 3 prime directives.
Serve the public trust, protect the innocent, uphold the law.
A fourth prime directive, Directive 4, is classified. What follows is a brutally entertaining movie that effortlessly reinvents what proper grown-up fiction filmmaking could be, and does so with panache, humour, and a satirical edge unseen in anything at the time. Robocop's initial crime fighting sees him easily foiling robberies or street crimes, and it's not until he encounters some of the goons who fatally wounded him that he begins to regain memories of who he was before and exactly what has been taken away from him. The aforementioned violence is gleefully constructed with a mixture of practical gore, prosthetics and stop-motion model work blended together beautifully. The early destruction of the poor, unfortunate Mr. Kitty is wildly over the top, and Murphy's assassination by Boddicker and friends is brutal, with limbs being blown off remorselessly. We're also treated to a warehouse shootout fully loaded with enough squibs to make John McTiernan blush, as well as a blood-soaked climactic battle with toxic waste melting bodies, decapitated heads, and a wonderfully satisfying sense of retribution. This, of course, is just scratching the surface of the ultra-violence on display, and we could discuss the violence and how it isn't simply there for shock value, but to add to the substance of the narrative and world building for hours. While the violence in the movie arguably helps to drive the plot forward, the key messages in the script are also telegraphed with wit and cynicism. We're shown various commercials that exist in the movie's dystopian Detroit future, such as a TV spot for a family nuclear war game called NUKEM, as well as one for the recurring 6000 SUX car with the rampaging eye-popping stop-motion T-Rex with the message that bigger is better. This ties in nicely with the movie's message that while weapons get bigger and better, more explosive and more powerful, brute force ultimately just creates more problems.
I like it!
The movie isn't subtle in any way and is all the more badass as a result. The social commentary makes you question the morality on display, how the hero is being controlled by a nefarious conglomerate, and offers a bleak worldview of the future. So, whether or not you're here for the subtext or to simply enjoy a revolutionary action movie with ultra-violence and cool one-liners, Robocop does not disappoint.
What's the charge?
He's a cop killer.
Robocop opened in North America on July 17th, 1987, and during its opening weekend, the movie exceeded all expectations by earning $8 million from 1,580 theatres. It was the weekend's #1 film, beating the re-release of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, plus the much-anticipated horror sequel Jaws: The Revenge. By the end of its theatrical run, the movie had grossed $53.4 million domestically, and while this didn't set the box office alight, it was nonetheless considered a modest success, with it being the 14th highest grossing movie of the year, behind the likes of Dragnet, La Bamba, and Crocodile Dundee.
That's not a knife. That's a knife.
Robocop was one of the surprise hits of the summer and helped to make 1987 set a record box office return of $1.6 billion. Thanks in part to a rise in ticket prices, but also quality, more adult-orientated releases in the marketplace. Following the success of Robocop and the growing cult status the movie was building, the studio and franchise rights holders began to fully embrace this, with a series of video games, merchandise, and yep, you guessed it, sequels. We'll hopefully cover the highs and, well, mostly lows of the subsequent movies in the franchise here on Revisited, including the mildly entertaining but sadly tame reboot from 2014 that somehow manages to cheapen and water down the iconic original. Also, as mentioned earlier in this video, Amazon Studios have announced that they are developing another incarnation of the franchise, and while the cynics among us, yep, me included, are skeptical, could they somehow recapture what made the first movie one of the greatest sci-fi action movies of all time? It's doubtful, but intriguing. One addition to the Robocop world is a crowd-funded making-of documentary called RoboDoc: The Creation of Robocop, due for release in 2023, that promises a tantalising glimpse into the making of the first 3 Robocop movies, and will feature interviews with key members of the cast and crew. Whatever your view of the movie is, there's no denying the fact that Paul Verhoeven and his team crafted a movie that not only stands the test of time, but also gets better as it gets older.
Nice shooting, son. What's your name?
Murphy.
You're on your own. There's a lot of jungle.